for most Americans, including me, Social Security is going to represent an important part of how we're going to fund our retirement. And because it's so important, I want to share with you today 4 simple things that we all can do to increase our Social Security benefits. These are right down the middle of the fairway. These are nothing fancy and nothing that's going to get you in trouble. I've been a financial advisor for over 20 years, and I can share with you knowing these 4 points is super important. So let's go for a walk and talk about it. And before I get into the 4 points, we need to understand how Social Security is determined. How does the government determine how much money we're going to get in Social Security? And essentially what the Social Security Administration looks at is our top 35 earnings years. So first off, making sure that we have income in each of those 35 years is important, because what the Social Security Administration does if we don't have income in a year is they just give us a solid goose egg there. So it doesn't take much to get to have a benefit that can move the needle. There's been points in how Social Security determines, it's called means tested, how Social Security determines, how important the income is. Not all of our income is of equal importance. So for instance, in 2024, as I record this, we pay Social Security, which is 6.2% of our payroll we put into Social Security, and our employer puts in another 6.2%. And if you're self-employed, you put in both sides of that, so 12.4%. Now you might be saying, hey, Azul, my payroll says FICA taxes are 7.65, but you just said 6.2. Well, the other 1.45% is for our Medicare. So those are called payroll taxes. They're not funded by income tax. They're not funded by our estate tax. They're funded from our payrolls, and essentially it's insurance that we're buying for our old age. So that's the first thing to know, is where the money comes from for Social Security. The other thing to know is that we all have what Social Security would call a primary insurance amount, which is what our full Social Security payment is going to be when we reach our full retirement age, which for many of us, if you were born 1960 or later, our full retirement age is going to be 67. So, and if you were born before 1960, it decreases by about 2 months for every year, just roughly. If you were born before 1960. So you don't have to work quite up to 67. So that's the background of it. Let me see if there's anything else I want to share with you. So there is that primary insurance amount, and you can get more if you work until past your full retirement age, which again is 67, and you get 8% more per year that you wait. So if you wait till 70, and after, you don't have to take Social Security at 70, but after that, you don't get an increase in your payment. So I can't think of a reason why you would want to not take your Social Security when you're 70. But if you wait until 70 and your full retirement age was 67, you would get 124% of your primary insurance amount. Hopefully that makes sense. You can also take Social Security early. You can start at 62, and basically each year that you take early before your full retirement age, your benefits decrease because you're going to get more payments. So the government says you can take it early, but we're going to pay you less. And if you take it at 62, which is the earliest you can take it as an individual filing on your earnings record, if you take it at 62, you're going to get 70% of your primary insurance amount. And each year that you wait past 62, your benefit's going to increase about 5 to 7 percentage points. So those are the basics. So let's jump in and talk about what are these 4 ways that, pretty simple, that you can do to make the decision that's right for you. And if you want to increase that benefit, how do you do that? And of course, the first one is just make sure that you have 35 years of earnings history in the Social Security system. And I mentioned that not every dollar of your salary counts the same. So you might have heard of progressive taxes on your income tax, which basically means, the rich pay more. And so this is kind of the reverse of this, where each dollar that you earn up until what the Social Security calls a bend point is worth more. Your first dollars are worth more towards your final benefit than your latter dollars. And let me give an example. Let's say we have two people. One person makes $50,000 a year for 35 years, and the other person makes $100,000 a year for 35 years. Well, if it wasn't for these bend points, the person that made $100,000 a year would get double in Social Security, which somebody that makes $50,000. But that's not how it works. Essentially, Social Security looks at, as of 2024, your first little over $7,000, and you get 90% credit for that. And at some point, as you get closer to the cap, which is in 2024 is $168,600, as you get closer to that cap, above which you don't have to pay these payroll, your Social Security payroll tax, you still got to pay Medicare tax, but that's 6.2%. Both you and your employer do not have to pay that tax above $168,600. So as you get closer to that amount, each additional dollar that you earn benefits you less and less. I believe it bottoms out at 15%. So those extra dollars really don't buy you much. But the first $7,000, $8,000 a year does buy you a lot. So the first strategy is, if you don't have 35 years of a work history, then try to fill that in. And it's not like you need to make $50,000 a year. Even just making that first $8,000 can move the needle, that first $7,000 to $8,000. Okay, number two is obvious. You know, I talked about full retirement age, and if you start collecting Social Security at 62, you're going to get 70% of your primary insurance amount, your PIA, which is what you get at your full retirement age. So another strategy is just to wait. You know, if you can afford to retire early, and not start collecting at 62, go ahead and do that. Now, stick around to the end, because I'm going to talk about some trade-offs in this and some really important pieces, because, boy, how you take your Social Security, how and when you take Social Security, and where you get your money to live off of retirement at can make a huge, huge difference. I mean, I'm talking thousands of dollars, potentially tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars over a retirement lifetime. So it's a super important strategy and thing to consider. But as far as Social Security, if you want a higher Social Security check, don't take your Social Security, just hold off on it. Now there's a trade-off. You know, after 70, you might as well take it, because it's not going to increase anymore after that. But there is a trade-off. If you take it at 62 and you end up living to 120, just to use an extreme example, you're going to be behind where you would have been if you had waited. Of course, if you die at 72, you probably would have been much better off taking Social Security at 62. So there is some unknown, there is some probabilities that you need to look into. But strategy number two is just simply to wait and let your benefit continue to increase each year. Strategy number three is to look at what's called your spousal benefit. So all of us have the ability, once we're age 62, to say, I want to collect Social Security I want to collect Social Security on my earnings record and get 100% of that Social Security benefit. Or you can look at your spousal earning history and say, I want 50% of what my spouse's Social Security benefit at full retirement age would have been. So even if you're divorced, as long as you were married at least 10 years, you can still claim on your spouse's plan. So that's another thing. Sometimes half of your spouse's full retirement benefit is more than what 100% of yours is. Where we typically see this is where one of the partners stayed at home to raise the family and take care of the kids. So that's another strategy, is be sure to look at your spousal benefit. And then there's another benefit that's related to a spouse, which is called the survival benefit. So if you were married and your spouse passed away, now you qualify for a spousal benefit. And with a spousal benefit, you can actually claim 100% of what your spouse's benefit was when they passed away. So you can get 100% of that. And what's interesting is on a spousal benefit, you don't have to wait to 62. You can start collecting that benefit when you're 60. Now you're going to get less than what you would have if you had started at 62, but know that that's an alternative for you and something to be thinking about. So that benefit can be powerful, and it's not a lifetime decision. You can switch over. So when you're 60, you could say, okay, my spouse passed away, and they would have been at full retirement age, and so this is what that benefit is. And at 60, 60 or 62, you can start collecting that. And then when your personal benefit maxes out at 70, then you can say, oh, I want to switch. So you'd want to work with a financial advisor. I think you want to work with a financial advisor on all of these. None of this is financial advice. This is things that should be on your radar screen. And so really the 4 things on your radar screen is make sure that you've worked the 35 years. If you haven't, then think about working a part-time job, and that first $7,000 or $8,000 of payroll income is the most important. It's going to move the needle a lot. The second is you wait to collect. Instead of collecting at full retirement age, instead of collecting early at 62, maybe you wait to 68, 69, 70. Third one is your spouse benefit. Remember, you can collect on your earnings record, or you can get half of your spouse's benefit. And the fourth one is the survival benefit. So those are the ways that you can increase the amount that you're getting paid in Social Security. But I mentioned earlier, let's keep going. I mentioned earlier that the tax implications on this are super important. So it turns out for the first 60 years, roughly 60 years of Social Security program, none of the Social Security payments that you received were taxable. Until 1983, Congress passed a law that said up to half of your Social Security could be taxed. And then in the early 90s, Congress passed another law that said up to 85% of your Social Security can be taxed. Now, it doesn't mean that the tax rate is 85%. It just means it can be included in your taxable income. And it's called your combined income. It can get complicated quickly, but just know that it's out there. And so understanding how your tax situation is an integral part of your Social Security strategy. And that's why I think it can make sense to work with a financial advisor or an accountant. So that's your tax standpoint. The other thing is most of us have been saving money, right? Hopefully we have money outside of Social Security that we're going to live on. And so most of us have been saving up this money, and maybe that's in a regular 401k, a regular IRA, or maybe that's in a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA, or maybe that's just in your bank account. And each of those are taxed differently. The first one, the regular IRA, the regular 401k, I call that a tax me later account, because when you take your money out, you're going to have to pay taxable income. The Roth versions of those I call tax me never accounts. That's not quite true, because you put money in after-tax dollars because it was a Roth, where with a regular account you could have put it in pre-tax dollars. So it's really not a tax me never account, it's tax me early, right? Or my grandfather was a farmer, tax the seed, the money that goes in, but don't tax the harvest after I let it grow for 20 years. So a tax me later or don't tax the harvest account. And then the third one is, as I said, just a regular taxable account at the bank or at a custodian where you have your stocks and bonds and stuff like that. Regular taxable account, which I call a tax me as I go account. So balancing out in retirement which account you're going to take your annual living expenses out of is really important. And it can easily amount to thousands of dollars saved, and more likely for most people, tens of thousands of dollars. So paying a professional, an accountant, or a financial advisor that's a fiduciary to you 100% of the time to look at that for you is likely going to result in a big return on your investment. So I think that's important. Another thing that's super important, and where people get hurt in retirement, is they put themselves in a situation where they can become a forced seller in a down stock market. And I don't want to see that happen to you, because it can destroy wealth very, very quickly. And so how you can inadvertently put yourself in a situation where you're a forced seller in a down market is, if you need cash, if you need living expenses, if you need money to fund your living expenses in retirement, But let's say the stock market's down 20, 30, 40% one year. Well, if you need that cash, you need that cash. And so you could be in a situation where you have to sell stocks when stocks are down, and I don't want that to happen to you. So what you can do to prevent that from happening is look at your asset allocation. Look at what percent of your portfolio is in stocks and what percent of your portfolio is in bonds. But instead of thinking it as 40% of my portfolio is in bonds and 70% in stocks, I don't want you thinking in percentages. I want you thinking in years. I have 3 years worth of bonds. I have 5 years worth of living expenses in bonds. I have 7 years worth of living expenses in bonds. And that's probably enough, 7 years. I'm not saying what your asset allocation should be, but 7 years lets you ride out a pretty bad storm if the stock market's down. But if you have the extra money and you want the sleep at night factor, then having more years worth of living expenses in something that hopefully is not going to be down in prices. There's no guarantees your bonds aren't going to be down. That does happen. It happened in 2022, which is one of the reasons that 2022 was so painful. It happened because interest rates had been so low for so long. And as interest rates went up, boy, those bonds that were paying no interest rate at all, they went down in value because people could buy new bonds that were maturing, that were being issued that paid higher interest rates. So anyways, you want to pick the right kind of bonds, which again is why you might want to think about working with a professional. Hopefully somebody that's thinking about these types of things 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And thinking about the things that most people aren't thinking about that can really bite you. So again, looking at these 3 buckets, looking at how things are taxed, and avoiding being a forced seller in a down market. These are 3 things that can really move the needle in addition to maximizing your Social Security. And I think, speaking of Social Security, right, that's a monthly income. I think if you enjoyed this video, you're really going to enjoy this video here where I talk about how much does the average American have in retirement income. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.